Good morning, everyone. We are going to start. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on the part of the globe you are joining us. We are ready. Thank you for joining us. We are very grateful for this. My name is Frances Carbonell. I'm head of sector for transport at the Secretariat of the Union for the Mediterranean. And I'll be co-moderating this meeting together with my colleague Philippe Guillaumet, Secretary General at the Medports Association, who has kindly agreed to co-organize this meeting with us. Let me recall very quickly before we start. I will be sharing a presentation on the screen. Let me recall very quickly some technical tips. Please, first of all, use headphones. It's possible. That will help the interpreters to be able to listen to you. Mute your microphone whenever you are not speaking, and turn off your camera as well. I'd like to recall as well that the webinar will be live streamed on Facebook. Our Facebook address is www.facebook.com/UFM Secretariat. And just let me recall, you have this in the logistical note that has been sent to you. So whenever you want to speak, you just have to raise hand using the function you will see on your screen. You can also use the Q&A function in order to submit questions to the speakers. And finally, you've got this interpretation button in which you have to select either English or French, or just leave it off if you don't want to connect to our interpreters. And please don't touch the mute original audio function. Just select English, French, or just leave it off if you don't want to select any of the two languages. And last but not least, please note, very important, that if you are listening to the translation on the French channel and you're going to speak, you must speak only in French. And if you prefer to speak in English, you must select the original audio or the English channel in the translation. So you have to choose in advance and before choosing the interpretation channel, whether you want to speak in French or in English. So if you speak in French, please choose the French interpretation channel, and vice versa. Okay, you also know that there's an app that has been provided to you. You can download it from Play Store or Apple Store. It's called Globenti, and you can use also this app for the interpretation. You can connect to it by using also listening to this webinar through the headphones on your mobile phone. So thanks a lot, and now it's my pleasure. I will stop sharing screen, and it's my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency, the Secretary General of the UFM Secretariat, Mr. Nasser Kamel. Mr. Secretary General, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you very much, you and all your colleagues in the very important sector of transport and urban development. Well, I'll start by extending to all of you, of course, my wishes for being in good health, all of you and your loved one, in a very exceptional circumstances. So I hope all of you are in good health, and that the next few weeks will bring a better condition for all of us. And on behalf of the UFM, or the Union for the Mediterranean, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on ports and maritime transport in the Mediterranean, and also the possible short and medium and long-term response we could bring to it. I'm extremely thankful and grateful to Medports Association for co-organizing this very important event with us. And I'm also thankful to all the distinguished speakers who are participating at today's meeting. The International Association of Ports and Harbors, the International Transport Forum of the OECD, l'Institut Supérieur d'Économie Maritime, IMO, the UN UNCTAD, the EU Commission. Thank you for accepting to share with you your insight, your knowledge, and your experience regarding this issue today. And also, all of you who are following, participating from across the globe, and also representative of governments, port authorities within our region, the Mediterranean, especially that we all know that we are all living under very stressful and busy schedule due to the emergency that we have to deal with in every sector, and more specifically on the maritime sector. Well, I don't need to tell experts that 80% of trade is transported by maritime, by shipping. And despite the difficult times we went through, ports all over the world have succeeded to keep their function and their primary role in terms of allowing cargo to move freely and smoothly from one country to another. Albeit, or despite the fact, of course, that passenger traffic is, for the time being, curtailed or closed, as far as I understand. Against all odds, our maritime industry is playing an essential role in the short-term emergency response to the pandemic by facilitating, of course, the transport of vital commodity and products, especially health and hygienic, mask, all we needed to deal with this emergency, and also basic goods and that have helped sustain a decent level of jobs and trade, and kept the global economy functioning, of course, at a much lower pace than before the crisis. We all know that mid and long-term responses to the crisis would need to take into account what the pandemic has already led to: a drop in global trade. We all know that we have lost so far maybe around 3% of that trade. We know that, unfortunately, for the next quarter, we'll be losing even more. Some people are predicting that the decline will be around 27%, which I hope it's not true. But in the final analysis, you, as primary responsible of this very important and strategic activity, are the one maintaining, protecting the supply chain and making it and keeping it open. And as much as we talk about regionalization and localization and changes in supply chains, and even people are talking about nationalization of supply chains, we all know that our world has become so interdependent and that our value chain and supply chain will remain global in nature, even if some changes happens in the next few years. And that will be ensured, of course, by continuous flow of maritime trade. Of course, while safeguarding health, safety, and the well-being of the transport or the maritime transport community. I'm quite confident that sharing what you're doing today in terms of sharing best practices for rendering shipping ports fully operational would help improve regional cooperation during the pandemic, and will also help build resilience. And the world resilience is very important at this particular time. Not only to deal with the current crisis, but also to be able to deal with future shocks in this sector in the wake of the crisis. Today's discussion are very important to us at the UFM because they will be the basis or the food for thought in our next UFM strategic transport action plan for the Mediterranean region. And in that sense, we'll be listening very carefully to your presentation, to your experience, to your strategies in dealing with the current crisis, to be able to draw a conclusion and lessons and integrate that in our strategic action plan. I wish you success in this deliberation, and I would like to thank you again for being with us, and hope this meeting will be fruitful and full of new and insightful knowledge for everyone participating. I will end by thanking all my partners again, and I will have I have the pleasure to give the floor to Monsieur Hervé Martel, le président de l'association Medport et aussi le CEO du Grand Port Maritime de Marseille. La parole est à vous. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. You have the floor. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are very proud and we feel very well. It's great to see you all well, and it is a pleasure to me to have the chance this morning, together with Medport Association, to open this seminar in relationship with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on ports and maritime transport in the Mediterranean region. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me now? I can hear you very well. Okay, so as I was saying, yes, once again I must be deeply thankful to the UFM. Thank you very much for the organization of this seminar and on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a very important issue. We all are aware about this issue, and well, we have loads of uncertainties and we still have a big question marks in relationship with the COVID-19, and we don't have realistic answers. Therefore, this seminar is going to be the first one of a series of seminars that will allow us to see what are the new solutions and the possible solutions in the field, and what will be the future of the world, mainly in the industry of transport, and how this will allow us to create a new network of transport much more integrated in the Mediterranean basin that will allow us to improve this nowadays situation. We are all aware. We are aware about the impacts of this pandemic. We have political, social, economic, as well as environmental impacts, and they are very different, and we can see different stages. From a short-term perspective, we can see that borders have been closed, and this, well, has an impact on the global economy. Due to the pandemic, we can see a fall of the port activity and maritime transport, and amongst our countries, I do believe that we must guarantee the land transport in order to improve our country's economy. And from a short-term perspective, if we see what will happen, it seems that the pandemic it's it's disappearing little by little, and we are, to me, we need to know how we are going to restart maritime activity, and how can we implement these activities amongst all the industries. After that, I think that it is very interesting to exchange these your ideas in this seminar, and as well as to analyze what will be the exit strategies. As I mentioned, well, we have very different situations, and industry by industry, the solutions are very different. Our General Secretary also mentioned that, well, many decisions have been stopped, and there are a lot of issues related with borders and customs. And I'm thinking about the maritime transport in the Mediterranean region, which is very important to all the members, as well as the cruising industry. To me, I don't know what is going to happen. I've never seen this kind of situation in the maritime transport sector. After an administration decision, the traffic and the maritime transport has suffered break, has stopped. This has had an impact on the maritime transport when talking about the cruising industry, and passenger transport in the Mediterranean region also is suffering a little. Well, will happen when all the prohibitions and the legislation will change. Well, I think that many people will suffer the impact of this cruising industry. The tourism in general, and mainly the cruising industry, will suffer a lot. This is something that makes us to be anxious. And what is going to happen in 2021? Maybe we'll see a new start in 2021. We'll see what will happen and how the industry will behave, and also how all the stakeholders are behaving, and if they are robust in order to restart this activity, as well as the trade sector. We suffered a lot, mainly to the stop of exports from China, and also a stop of imports coming from other countries, and the consumption as well as, and finally, and probably in a more deeper way, how the impact of the economy will play a vital role. Will play an impact all over the planet. We don't know what is going to be the pace of recovery, and we don't know how the economies will restart, because we are suffering a very, very deep crisis in North America. Therefore, I do believe that there is a lot of uncertainty. No one can see what will happen with the transport industry, and we have a new organization. We need to better organize the maritime lines and to reduce the amount of stopovers in different ports. Is this crisis going to relaunch a concentration model that will allow us to stabilize the situation? the different stops and also what will make carriers to behave differently. Maybe we'll see a change in the route maps. And as for the industry, once again, depending on the sector, the situation is different. The car industry is suffering a lot. We suffer a stop, a reduction of production, as well as the different sectors. There is a problem to provide raw materials, stock saturation. So many sectors, industry sectors, are suffering a lot, and the manufacturing sector is suffering too. So to me, what is clear is that we have loads of elements that will make the manufacturer owners to rethink the industry and to reshape these strategies, as is happening in many manufacturing sites. Well, from a short perspective, this is what I can say. This is something that I'd like to discuss with you. We can say that there is a lot of uncertainty, and as for a long-term perspective, what is going to happen with the localization of the transport? We have loads of hypotheses towards the future. It is true that we must wonder about the globalization model. I do agree with the Secretary of the UFM. This globalization is going to change, and we are questioning this is not a regional model, but we'll see different strategies and different trends, and the ports will suffer an impact due to this lack of globalization, and maybe this will be an opportunity through this regionalization. So we are facing this level of uncertainty, and what can we do? We must get ready to the future, and future that is unknown, and to get ready to participate in the construction of this future. And what does this mean to us? This means that our industry, as well as for many other industries, it is more than obvious that we must be organized in a different manner, differently from the past. When we talk about maritime transport and logistics, what are the health devices for health protection of our workers, how to better organize health systems, and we should get used to live with different methods as well as new strategies, because if the second wave of this pandemic, and we'll see a new pandemic wave next year, so we'll see what happened, right?
I think the organizations within our industry will be deeply modified. We can say that through more dematerialization, more digitalization, more remote working. This webinar is an example of that. In a few words, I think we will never come back to the previous situation, but the world of the future, the strategic axis on which our association is working since several years, it will be reinforced. I think that our collective work around the Mediterranean has all its meaning, the subjects we are dealing with. I think that's the idea. The Mediterranean will keep being an exchange land, a land or a sea of exchange. And once again, I think it is important that collectively we can propose solutions for the world of the future after the crisis. We share these goals, and I think we already started to do so. Amongst them, there is a goal concerning the deployment of new fuels, the support for renewable energies. Due to the COVID, we had to cancel a seminar about the gap in the Mediterranean in partnership with the UFM. These discussions are still on the table, and we will have to restart with them once it is possible. A renewal of the logistic organization with this sea highways, we can say that a trans-Mediterranean network of transport could be a link between the Mediterranean corridors and those who are implemented in the African continent. It is a good way to support intermodality. Euro and Europax in Mediterranean, we have to relaunch it once it is possible. The industrial densification throughout the Mediterranean with eventually re-regionalization of certain productive sectors, decarbonated and competitive. We're talking of exchange of growth and an objective of competence and qualification. I think it is paramount. We have been working much on this within our association to get answers about the future works, the future jobs. We are working on the YetMed project to improve the employability of young people in the port sector, and another subject in which the association has been deeply involved, a sort of a cloud of training offer at the scale of the Mediterranean for young people and new employments. We have to foster, to further foster all this. I think that this first webinar is the dreamed occasion to put these subjects on track again. I'm very happy that this takes place with the UFM once again. It is very important that we can pursue, we can continue deepening within this collaboration amongst us to implement these very concrete solutions, starting by the accompaniment to the creation of new intra-Mediterranean marine lines. We are working on a memorandum of understanding, and I hope it will be signed and agreed pretty soon, as you wish to. We all suffered from the consequences of this pandemic, of this crisis, more or less according to the different sectors and the features of the ports, according to the reactions of the different states. And during this period, our association wanted to foster the information exchanges about best practices so we can keep this contact chain. Since end of April, we've been organizing the coffees of Medports, gathering the authorities of port authorities. In the coming months, there is plenty of uncertainty. It can be difficult to go forward. We want to safeguard the ecosystem, the marine and port ecosystem. We will have to implement the measures that will be decided at authority and port level. Our association, with the help of the UFM, will continue to keep its role, to play its role within the identification of this Mediterranean network of ports, so that once again the Mediterranean keep proposing alternative solutions, innovative and sustainable solutions for the ensemble, for the whole port sector within this Mediterranean basin. The next General Assembly that will be held on June 23rd, so that we can clearly launch again or boost again our works towards 2021. I wish you all an excellent webinar and an excellent day to you all, and I hope to see you very soon, to see you physically very soon. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you for these inspiring remarks. I think that we are ready to move to the first session with our panelists. I think from these welcoming remarks, we can derive that there are plenty of challenges and opportunities ahead, and maybe the best way to face these challenges and to implement these opportunities is firstly through evidence-based responses. And we have in our first panel, which will be dealing with the impacts of the current pandemic on maritime transport and port connectivity in the region. We have three panelists representing three organizations who are really dealing with data, making their forecasts and an assessment of the current situation, and also giving us some indication on which could be the way forward to as a response to the crisis. So it is my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker in this panel, Mr. Patrick Verhoeven. He's the managing director of the International Association of Ports and Harbors. Patrick Verhoeven is the managing director of this association, and he's responsible for policy and strategy. This organization, IAPH, represents about 170 ports and some 140 port-related businesses in 90 countries worldwide. Patrick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesc, and good morning to everybody. Best regards from Antwerp. I'm very sorry, of course, that I'm not really joining you in the Mediterranean, which would have been a lot nicer, of course. But this city, as you know, or may not know, has been under Spanish rule for several centuries. So we really feel like we are in the Mediterranean. And even today, the weather is helping us. We have a very beautiful sunny day here in Antwerp. So very glad to be with you in this webinar and to share some views with you and some thoughts on how the crisis is indeed impacting the sector worldwide, and what are some of the issues that will come on our path during the next weeks and during the next months. I have a few slides to help me with the story. I think somebody will put them up, or am I supposed to share them myself? That's entirely clear.
No, I will be sharing them.
Okay. Thank you. So if we can go to the next slide, that gives an overview of some of the topics that and some of the perspectives that in the next 10 minutes or so, I would like to share with you. And if we can go immediately to the first point, the present impact. We've been conducting since the beginning of April an economic impact barometer, where we are surveying ports every week and asking them for feedback on 6 indicators, which you see there in the left column of the slide here. So we ask ports to share with us their impressions of the impact of vessel calls, on restrictions that have been imposed, on delays that have been caused by extra procedures, delays in hinterland transport, capacity utilization, and possible shortages of workers. And we distinguish for each of the indicators also in a number of categories. And so we've been monitoring at a global level this picture for 7 weeks now. And of course, you see an evolution in these graphs, and you see, for instance, on vessel calls that from the start of the second quarter, indeed, there is a more pronounced impact. What is also clear is that if we look at the port business in general, that the impact on passenger vessels has been the highest, as we all know, since the cruise industry and cruise business has come to a complete stop. What we've also noticed over the weeks is that, of course, regional differences are becoming more and more pronounced. And what you see here is a global picture that hides, of course, certain regional differences. We started also since a few weeks to bring in a regional focus. And for the purpose of this webinar, I've included a specific Mediterranean focus, which is the last column in the graph. We had in the last survey, so last week's survey, we had 11 ports from the Mediterranean joining. Most of them are European, so I think that's also important to notice. But you do see that compared to the global picture, which is the column just before that in week 21, you see that there seems to be a much more pronounced impact on decline in vessel calls, for instance. There is also a more pronounced impact on hinterland transport delays, and there seems, lastly, to be also more pronounced impact when it comes to shortages of port-related workers. Of course, the crisis affects regions in the world at different stages, starting in Asia, then moving to Europe, to North America. We are getting out of lockdown, but there are still parts of the world where the crisis is still reaching its peak, for instance, in Latin America. So that is why that we decided also with this barometer, first of all, to continue that from now on a bi-weekly basis, but in every report include a regional comparison on the different indicators so that we get a better picture of what is really going on in the world. That is observing what is happening at the moment. And if we can go to the next slide, I think what we're all, of course, more interested in. Next slide, please. Yes, is what will happen, what will be sort of the scenario for the months and the year to come, what will be the impact on trade, notably. As I mentioned, we've seen the impact on ports, on cargo volumes, especially since the second quarter. This is a forecast that was produced beginning of April by the World Trade Organization, where they plot the, let's say, future development of world merchandise trade volumes in different scenarios. A lot of uncertainty, and I think Hervé Martel also mentioned it in his introduction. A lot of uncertainty still reigns. But according to WTO, in any case, they believe that even in an optimistic scenario, that which is the green scenario, that the decline will be more profound than the one of the last disruption that we had, which was the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. There was a major difference between these crises, and again, Hervé mentioned that very, very clearly in his introduction, is that the impact is actually, of course, it's virus, but the impact is government measures that have brought trade into decline because of the lockdowns and all of the other measures that were introduced. And in the end, it will also be governments rather that will take us out of that situation, as we see release of the quarantine and other measures. Of course, what we don't know is, will there be a second peak? Will there be a vaccine? By what time will it come on the market? That also brings, of course, the uncertainty in this whole picture. One thing, and if we can go to the next slide, please. One thing that is certain is, I think, that we will remain in what is called the 1.5 meter economy for some time. Social distancing is not going to go away in a couple of weeks or even a couple of months from now. As I said, until the vaccine is really widely available across the world, we will have to work in conditions which are different than the ones that we were used to. For those of us working in offices, teleworking will stay with us, and that even may have some positive influences as well. Think on travel, think on congestion. commuting and things like that. But of course, in our business, in logistics and ports, teleworking is not possible for everybody. And that means we have to look at other forms of innovation where people can perform their tasks in a safe, possible way. On the picture here is an example of one of these innovations that hit the news quite broadly. This is a sort of bracelet or a watch which warns you if you are getting too close to somebody else, if you're working closer than within 1.5 meters. People who invented this actually invented it first for another purpose, but now it seems that it is actually quite handy to use in ports during operations, and they're making actually now very good business out of this innovation. So the crisis sometimes has a silver lining as well. Of course, with bringing in more technology to control how people work, one thing that will remain a major concern is privacy and how we deal with that, because some of the ideas that are floating around by using drones and other things, personally, I think are rather scary. So I think we should also come to a good balance here between both the innovations that exist and the privacy of people. Next slide, please. That brings us actually to the broader subject of digitalization. I think one thing that the crisis has illustrated is how important ports, shipping, the logistics industry is when it comes to keeping supply chains moving and feeding people, making sure essential supplies get where they have to be. The other thing that the crisis has demonstrated is that when you look at the global port sector, really there is a lot of heterogeneity when it comes to digitalization. Of course, we know a lot of the leading ports that call themselves smart ports that have really invested quite heavily in digitalization, but the majority is really lagging behind, and in some cases even far behind. I think we saw now very clearly how in many port communities people still have a large reliance on personal interaction and paper-based transactions. And just an indicate, port community system is considered to be, the cornerstone if you want to embrace digitalization and electronic exchange of information and documents and so on in the port. And port community systems have been with us for a long time. They were already invented in the 1980s. But if you look at the IMO member states, there are 174 IMO member states. Well, and they're all some maritime countries basically. Only 49 of them currently have ports with port community systems. So that's less than 1/3. And it doesn't always mean developed versus developing countries, because the United States, for instance, only has one port with a port community system, which is the port of Los Angeles. So there is which is the port actually that you see on the picture here. So there is a great opportunity here to accelerate, digitalization in our sector, and that is precisely the kind of recommendations that we are formulating as IPH together with a number of other maritime organizations. We hope to bring those recommendations out this week or early next week, which will be 8 recommendations in total, and they range from the basic implementation of what is already legally required under the IMO FAL Convention, which is the electronic exchange between ship and shore, but moving further to new data sets that will enable port call optimization and the introduction of electronic bills of lading. I think there is a window of opportunity here now to work with governments and intergovernmental organizations to move digitalization to the next level in our sector. So the next slide, if I may. We talked about disruption, we talked about digitalization. The other big D is decarbonization. And of course, we had an ambitious program here developed for the maritime sector at the level of the IMO, with a target to reduce carbon emissions of shipping with 50% by 2050 compared to 2008 level. As a result of the crisis, a lot of, or at least 2 important meetings at IMO level, which were due to take place this spring and where a number of important decisions were expected, had to be postponed. So the question is, will that have a major impact on the target? Are we still on track? And perhaps even more important, what is the appetite of the industry to invest in decarbonization now that there is a crisis on our hands, which will have effects on business and on economics? And if you read the newspapers, you get some conflicting views. Some say that it's a great opportunity to accelerate, like with digitalization, but then others are more careful and say, well, the crisis may have a negative impact on the investments that we have to take in the sector to allow decarbonization. So there are a number of mixed messages out there. Next slide, please. I could also have shown a cruise vessel here rather than a big container vessel, but I think the discussion is the same thing. Already before the crisis, there was a discussion whether the obsession with volume and size in our industry has reached its limits. And what it certainly the crisis has again illustrated, as it did in 2008 and 2009, is the vulnerability for ports with a revenue model that is based on volume. And there are possibly opportunities here to rethink that concept of how a port is organized and what revenue streams a port has other than port dues and concession fees. So that's maybe an issue that can also be brought more to the forefront in the discussions as, what are we, or what sort of sector are we becoming in post-COVID-19 times. And finally, to end on, if the next slide, please, to end on a positive note, I think what I noticed, and I think a lot of people noticed, is that generally, so not even within our sector, but generally, this crisis has brought people together more than ever. And I think we see that also in our industry, which is an industry that is notoriously fragmented. But we saw over the last weeks several, not so fast, please keep this one. We saw several initiatives that were raising attention for ship crews, port workers, other essential workers in the supply chain. This initiative, Forms of Hope, was initiated by Abu Dhabi ports and got following all over the world. And also at, let's say, the level of trade organizations that I operate in, we've seen this industry come together in a number of initiatives, writing and preparing recommendations on various issues like crew changes, ship-shore interface. I join a call every week, which is every Wednesday, which is today, with more than 20 international maritime organizations. We call each other every week during an hour just to update each other and collaborate on a number of initiatives, Direction, IMO, G20, and we've also been working on other initiatives. So hopefully this may have a lasting impact on a sector which, as I said before, is notoriously fragmented. So that's what I had as an introduction. If I can just end with two small notices on the next slide. This is our World Ports COVID-19 information portal, where you will find the economic barometer reports, which are much more detailed than what I showed in my initial slide. You will also find guidance here on operating, of course, within a COVID-19 environment, but also how to get out of lockdown, and also various international guidances from other organizations and regular news updates. And final slide is the last slide, please, is a little advertisement for a webinar that we are organizing in a series of coronavirus webinars, which we started when we were forced to cancel our own conference in Anto in March. And the next one is about improving ship-shore relations in the post-COVID-19 era, where we have the Secretary General of IMO, Kita Klim, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, and the CEO of the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore on the 10th of June. So I warmly invite you to join that. And thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to be on this MedPorts webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for your insight. It is much appreciated. I'm sure there will be questions and some debate afterwards, even with IMO regarding this the third D you have put forward about decarbonization and what can be the impact of the current pandemic on decarbonization, and whether it can be a driving force, as you said, or it can maybe negatively impact on the evolution of the trend we had already initiated. So thanks again, and I'm now happy to give the floor to the next speaker, to Olaf Merck, who's an economist and responsible for ports and shipping at the International Transport Forum at the OECD. Olaf has directed and written a range of subjects, including port policy, megaships, cruise shipping, and decarbonization of maritime transport. And he will be providing us with an assessment that ITF is conducting now, and also on the impact of COVID, and by using their very relevant data sets they usually manage at ITF, and with a particular focus on the Mediterranean ports. So thank you, and Olaf, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning to all. It is indeed a pleasure to be at this webinar of the Union for the Mediterranean and Medports, even if, of course, a live meeting would have been nice. I also have a couple of slides to show, basically to give our impression of what is the impact of the crisis on the Mediterranean ports. So if the slides could be put up, then I can just walk you through them. And the idea is to really give you some sort of an idea of what can we see as trends over the last couple of months in the Mediterranean ports. I don't see the slides yet. Can they be put up, please? Yes, and there they are. Very good. So the first slide I'd like to show you is basically what is the impact on the port volumes of the main ports in the Mediterranean. These are data that we collected ourselves. They include around 30 different ports in the Mediterranean region, and this is what we see for the first quarter in 2020. So these are, let's say, year-on-year figures. So that means we compare the first quarter of 2020 with the first quarter of 2019. And when you look at these numbers, what we see is, in terms of total port volumes, we see a drop of around 5% in this first quarter. And then, of course, there is a lot of difference in the different, let's say, categories of cargo and passengers. Actually, there we see an increase in liquid bulk. We see a small increase in container traffic, but we see large drops in dry bulk, minus 12%. And of course, we see huge drops when it comes to ferry traffic and cruise traffic and cruise passengers. So the drops here we notice over the first quarter is minus 21 for ferries and minus 34 for cruise passengers. The next slide looks more closely and zooms in on what has happened per month. So here we look at let's say the first 4 months over 2020. So we also include data for the ports that already disclose this data on what's happening in April. And what we see here is, well, in itself, not very surprising. The main negative impacts are, of course, taking place in March and in April. So these are, let's say, the bars in orange. The dark orange is April, the lighter colored orange is March. In total, we have seen drops in cargo volumes of minus 12% in March, minus 13% in April, and of course, a very large drops in when it comes to the ferries and to the cruise. In March, for ferries, there was minus 60% with regards to passengers. For cruise, was minus 70% of the passengers. This doesn't include the passenger numbers for April, but of course we know that for at least for the cruise passengers, this is virtually zero at the moment. So the drops, the declines would be even larger for this month. Now, we also looked in, that's in the next slide, at the canal crossings, the Suez Canal crossings. The data that we found so far are only on the first 2 months. So what, let's say, the effect of the crisis is not really visible there. You see overall around 10% more ships over the first 2 months. But what is interesting is that there is already a decline with regards to the car carriers and the number of container ships. And the reason why that is interesting is because we have recently seen a lot of container carriers, several container carriers, circumventing the Suez Canal, taking instead the Cape of Good Hope route because this is cheaper for them in the current circumstances with very low oil prices compared to the Suez Canal tolls. Now, the next slide gives us a little bit of impression what did it actually cost to transport to or from the Mediterranean. We zoomed in here on the container shipping costs. This is let's say the development of the Asia-Med container spot rates since 2016. And if you look at what happened, let's say over the last 3 months, basically we see stability, if you can put it that way. So there's not, let's say, a drastic drop or decline that you might expect. This is actually, let's say, a fairly stable development, which in a way is actually pretty remarkable. Especially if you consider that these spot rates, do not include, let's say, or take into account that the fuel prices have gone down over the last period. So if you would take that into account, actually, what you see is that the container freight rates have increased by 25 to 40% over the last couple of months. Then there was also a question to say something about connectivity, and this is highlighted in the next slide, which looks at well, the number of services and more specifically the number of services that were cancelled. So the number of blank sailings. And why is this taking place? Well, basically because in the container sector, a lot of the capacity is now being idled and withdrawn from operation. At the global level, this is around 10%. So 10% of the global fleet capacity is not in operation at the moment. And the way this is done is by canceling a lot of the regular services, of course, in a lot of different ports. This is the picture on the Asia Med trades. Of course, differences between ports, and when you look at the Mediterranean ports, there are some ports where up to 50% of the container services were cancelled. And this, in a way, is also how carriers have managed to maintain high freight rates. So they withdraw capacity, and that has allowed freight rates to remain stable. This brings me to, let's say, a slide that is a little bit less on the impact, but more on, let's say, how this crisis could be used to not let it go to waste. There is this saying that the crisis is also an opportunity, and of course, this is in a way a cliche, but it also contains a lot of truth. And governments have a lot of leverage at the moment to actually use this crisis to not go to waste. And that is because of the debt of shipping companies. For example, if you look at the container sector, the accumulated debt of the largest 10 carriers at the moment is around $100 billion, which is kind of the debt of a medium-sized country. Why this debt? Well, basically because there have been a lot of acquisitions of competitors, of smaller companies, of a lot of ships, the bigger ships, of course, and a lot of vertical integration. So a lot of acquisition of let's say, other parts of the container supply chain, including terminal operators and logistics companies. This has created a lot of debt, and in a way, this has also been stimulated by government policies, for example, by subsidies that have facilitated carriers to buy more and bigger ships. Why is it giving this leverage to governments? Well, because this debt has created an unsustainable situation, which means that a lot of carriers will become dependent on their governments for bailouts, for lines of credit. And here is the leverage. Three concerns that this leverage could take into account. The first is the moral hazard that is related to shipping debt, but also to bailouts, basically. Moral hazard means that if you know that you're going to be bailed out, you're going to take more risk. And this is basically what we think has also happened over the last couple of years. So carriers took more debt on than was really sustainable, and which also explains that even if the crisis has been relatively mild for the moment for container carriers, if you look at the numbers, for example, there are still a lot of carriers already that get state aid and that get support packages from their government. So that is one concern, the moral hazard, and also if somehow bailouts could help to get this moral hazard and this risk-taking to a lower level. The second concern it's related actually, but is a more broader point, which is that a lot of the risks and the costs of shipping have been offloaded to public sector and society. And an example is the Suez Canal that I just mentioned a little bit earlier, where carriers are now circumventing the canal and are taking another route because it is cheaper. But of course, in the process, this takes longer, they burn more fuel, it creates more emissions. And of course, it also brings in less revenues for the Suez Canal. And I think this is significant because, in a way, the new Suez Canal and the, let's say, the broadening of the Suez Canal was also needed because the ships got much bigger. So carriers needed a bigger canal, but now are in a situation where they are actually paying less or expect the canal authority to reduce the fees. So in a way, the situation is that shipping firms can reduce their costs, but in the process also increase the cost for society. And that is because all of the, let's say, what economists call externalities, so the external costs of shipping are most of the time not included, not incorporated in the price that is paid for this. So there's a lot of tax exemptions, for example, for ship fuel, which makes this possible in the first place. There's no way in which carbon is priced. Just a few examples. And then the third challenge that is also related is that there is, in a way, a race to the bottom of government subsidies that makes this possible. If you look in history, what you see is that a lot of the, let's say, the subsidies or the support that was supposed to be temporary, that was supposed to be related to a crisis, actually remained in place after the crisis. That happened after the large and the great crisis in the 1930s. And that also happened in the financial crisis in 2008 to 10. So there is an expectation that this might happen again, and also that there will be some sort of a competition between different states on who actually creates the best conditions for shipping companies to come. An example of that is what we've seen now in several countries, which is reduced port fees. So reducing the fees for shipping companies in time of the crisis, which strikes me as some sort of a curious idea, because first of all, ports are themselves also affected by the crisis. We've seen the numbers, and it has a direct impact on the revenue streams for ports. That was also mentioned by Patrick Proven in his talk. And maybe ports are even worse affected than some of the shipping firms, because they cannot actually cut a lot of their costs. They cannot, in a way, withdraw the vessels from operation to use that equipment. And then, of course, this risks some sort of a race to the bottom. If one port starts to do it, the other ports are also looking if they are going to reduce the fees. Maybe they also feel tempted to do the same. Well, in conclusion, there are already severe impacts from this crisis. That is clear. We showed some of the numbers. Obviously, there will be more impacts in the months to come. Previous speakers have noted how difficult it is to project what will be going on. But it is clear that this crisis is far from over. Governments have leverage and can use this crisis actually to stimulate more resilient and sustainable shipping models, and we certainly hope that that is one of the things that is going to happen in the coming months. Maybe one last slide to show you. 30 ports that are included. Of course, these are not all of the Mediterranean ports, and we would be happy to include, of course, the data also from the ports that we do not have information on at this moment. So happy to contact me for that information. And I think I'll leave it at this. For the moment, happy to take any questions and looking forward to a discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf, also for your insight. I think we will have time afterwards, although we are quite behind the schedule now to go over some of the issues you have raised. And now I've been asked by the next speaker, by Paul Touré, to give him the floor because he has another video conference in some minutes. So I would like to quickly give him the floor in order for him to brief us on also his on the forecasts that are being conducted at the Institut Supérieur d'Économie Maritime, ISEMAR. Thank you, Paul. The floor is yours.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello everyone, I will talk in French, not too fast for the translation. So let me cover what has been said before, but some forecast, if I may so. May I have the first slide, please?
Ok, par contre, mes slides sont en anglais, donc
My slides are in English, so they are accessible to all of us. The first page that we are going to see is the timeline, the well-known timeline, the particularity of this crisis. We remember in 2008 or in 1929 the collapse of this system, but now it is not a progressive advance. We had the Chinese effect in winter and the European movement, the starting point of the lockdown, and this worldwide movement since April, and since the 1st of May we have the end, the starting of this end of lockdown in Europe and another American movement that will continue. That's the particularity of this phenomenon. That means that it is on evolution in the good way, as we might hope. Some baseline information, some basic information. First, the oil price. There is a speculative market with oil. That means that we consume very little. There has been a boom of oil activity in land stocks. The trouble in our ports is mostly the slowdown of refinery, and we know that tankers are very important as for the revenues of the port authorities. It is wishable to get to the new normal. The summer season will bring again the activity. The dry bulk market to the right. It is important to see the forecast by Carlson for 2020. In fact, the Clarkson report in April, this concerns very little reduced activity. As for Europe, we can see that the activity or coal and iron will be reduced, as well as concrete and siderurgical activities. There might be a decrease of 10-15% in this year as for the activities linked to bulk transport. There has been a huge progression of exports of grain, cereals, and and like this, so feed for animals and soya. So a relatively good year for port activities in the north or the south. As for containers, that's the next slide. As it was said, these 3 months have been hard. The container ship has been shocked, but 10, 15, 17% of reduction in capacity during the months of winter months, but it is not a total collapse. There is an amortization of this shock, of this collapse. We can see it clearer in the next China Container Freight Index to highlight that ship owners decided to keep the prices. Still, it is good news. It is important that the market supports the industry of containers more than the states support the companies. France and Germany have other interests with airplane and car industry. So the maintenance of freight rates, which are correct, if we compare to what happened in autumn 2019, the maintain of a freight rate, an acceptable freight rate, is a good news. I took the National Retail Federation, the American Retailer Association, with a monthly forecast, and we can see the evolution of the European market. We can see a collapse in March and April with the lockdown, the lack of consumption, and finally month of May and June that will start up again, weaker than last year, but with the end of lockdown, return to consumption. Are we consuming useful, or is it for leisure or fun? It will be the question of the economics. In 2009, it had been a depression in the economy. The Americans, the Europeans didn't consume, didn't buy almost anything, but there could be a recovery, a quick recovery. We could see minus 8% for Alpha Liner, minus 11% for Klaxon. So the container are shocked, are seasonally collapsing, but with a more positive overview, more positive outlook for the whole year. As for the Mediterranean, it is our problems. We have the Canal, we have the central Mediterranean, we have the hinterland ports of the north. Everyone knows it, but the level of GDP, Greece, Italy, France, and Spain, we are between minus 10% of the GDP, which is a shock, a collapse, very important vis-à-vis the 2008 crisis. I made a graph that I will share with you. We are going to move from one page to another, and I will come back, don't worry. I put the activity for the 5 biggest ports, Spain, Valencia, Barcelona, La Spezia, Geneva, and Marseille. The GDP moved from 5 to 3%, and the fall had been important. We had 10 points of fall. As for the crisis of 2012, we have a contraction of 2% of the GDP. The question is simple. With the fall of the GDP this year, around 10%, until how much will be the decrease of container trade within the next months? But the crisis of the COVID is not the crisis of 2009 and 2012. 2009, it was a huge worldwide economic crisis The one in 2012 was a financial crisis touching sovereignty, and the crisis of the COVID has been a health crisis with an impact on the economies, of course. Here are some forecasts. I'm not a think tank, but I try to think we can see that the situation of the spring, we can see the fall of the cruise industry, minimal services for ferry and ro-ro, no tourism, cancelling of box ship calls, change of services, no shopping, the stop of car sales, no industrial activities, refineries, steel plants, car factories, continuity of grain trade. On the contrary, I put red, yellow or orange lights. That's clear that summer will be a bit tough, and we can expect more positive situations in autumn. We can see that, first of all, lockdown will help the sectors to start again. And I am not talking of a situation with a vaccine, but just with some normality, so we can find better activities which will have beneficial impact on ports. Car sales could be important, where tourism, ferry tourism or containers can find some quicker phenomenon. To end up with this, we will move to the last one. As we said, I am not going to enter into the details, but what is the future like? Minus 13% or minus 36%? The European lockdown, as it is set, can bring to an important crisis, but not a catastrophe. We don't have to have a comeback of the pandemic, of course. I put the ferry because all Mediterranean ports are impacted by this. Let's move to the next slide to remember, to recall the volumes. Morocco, 12 more or less, they are up to 20 million passengers. A normal touristic season in Sardinia, Sicilia, and Corsica, or the Balearic Islands would be welcome for our port authorities, but it is a political decisions to be made. It is a part of lockdowns, so we have to authorize this European tourism to leave again their countries to go on holidays. I don't talk about the cruisers, which are more specifics, but as for the ferries, we hope this future will be at least not pink, but acceptable for next summer. A huge outlook. Finally, we can see that the lockdown on May and June may allow the return to something, not to the normal, but to something. This season will be perturbed, but there will be a return to consumption. It is not, it has little to do with the crisis of 2008 and 2012. We are in harm, but the economy is not questioned. For the end of the year, the essential matters of the pandemic could be solved, could be corrected. I am not saying that the future is all pink or blue, but we suffered from this huge shock that was imposed by lockdown. And even if it has questioned the economy, it is not an economic collapse. We have to keep in mind the terrific results of 2008, the the basis had been too much question, and there is this hope, this rising sun on this Mediterranean port, and which shows us that we can be optimistic for the future, even though the shock, the collapse has been rude for maritime, for marine authorities. I hope I wasn't too fast for our translators. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, also for your very interesting proposal and for this message of optimism. Although we are quite behind the schedule, I would like to give the floor to some of our participants who already wanted to intervene. First, I would like to ask Camille Bourgeon from IMO, with whom I already had an exchange yesterday, to take the floor, please, and elaborate a little bit on the issue I was raising before about how COVID-19 is does IMO expect that it will impact on the decarbonization trend that the shipping sector had already started before the crisis. So, Camille, if you are around, I will ask my team to open your microphone so that you can intervene.
Me now. Thank you, Francesc. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Francesc, for organizing this this webinar, and thank you for giving me the floor. My colleague Julian Abril will provide a detailed presentation on IMO's response to COVID-19 later today, but I will just update on recent developments that regards the IMO greenhouse gas agenda, and I follow on one of the points raised also by Patrick earlier today. Well, as you know, MEPC 75 and also the greenhouse gas intersessional working group that was supposed to take place the week before have been postponed. They were supposed to take place in March and April, and they were expected to be important meetings for GHG emissions from shipping. So in terms of rescheduling formal IMO meetings, the IMO Council of Member States is currently discussing the prioritization and the reconstruction of the IMO meeting schedule, and this is ongoing now. There's a correspondence council session that is taking place until July, and we can feel that there's a general agreement so far for identifying GHG as a priority issue, but we'll see what comes out of this council session. In general, I'd like to remind that IMO remains committed to implement the 2018 initial IMO greenhouse gas strategy and also its program of follow-up actions up to 2023. You may have followed the recent developments and seen that the focus is now on developing short-term GHG reduction measures for existing ships, with the target of at least 40% carbon intensity reduction by 2030 set up in the strategy. And several proposals are on the table. They're looking at the technical efficiency, but also the operational efficiency of the ship. You have, for example, proposals that include a mandatory rating of ships. We envisage to organize a virtual informal meeting in beginning of July to keep the GHG momentum and also to progress discussions on the short-term measures. And we're very encouraged by the fact that many member states are actually currently discussing with each other to facilitate future agreement when a formal meeting will be held later this year, hopefully. And we're confident that IMO member states will be able to reach a global agreement on short-term measures to reach the 40% target by 2030 this year, in line with the strategy and with the timelines that are set out in the strategy. In parallel, we have been continuing our work on other greenhouse gas reduction measures. Since mid-March, all the IMO Secretariat has been working from home. Good progress is made to prepare the fourth IMO greenhouse gas study. It is still expected to be published by the end of the year, and it will provide emissions estimates for 2012 to 2018 and also projections towards 2050. In parallel, we also have in end of June the first submission deadline for 2019 fuel oil consumption data collection, which is mandatory for all ships that are above 5,000 GT for all around the world. And 2019 is the first year of collection, so that's an important step as well. And we continue our work in terms of technical cooperation and in terms of also the public-private partnership we have, which is called the Global Industry Alliance, which gathers IMO as well as a number of companies, shipping companies in particular. They're looking at how to facilitate the transition towards low carbon shipping in the future, and they've identified recently in a meeting that they will intensify their work on the ship-port interface. Well, the work continues, and to respond also to one of the points raised by Patrick, I think the appetite of the industry for a global regulatory framework on GHG emissions remain high, and IMO remains committed to implement the strategy and its long-term vision towards decarbonization of shipping remains unchanged. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Now I would like to ask if any of our panelists in this session would like to react to this. Maybe Patrick, or since you have raised the point in your presentation.
No, thank you. Nice to see you, Camille. Hope you are doing well, and thank you for your comment. I certainly didn't want to doubt the commitment of the IMO with my comment, but it is true that we do read, let's say, conflicting views from the industry mainly, and we were on a very good momentum, I think, before the crisis happened, and we saw a lot of constructive proposals coming forward on the agenda for not only for the short-term measures where the decisions were supposed to be taken in spring and hopefully will be taken this year, but it's that broader discussion about the fuel of the future, what terms of infrastructure are we going to need for that, and the immense amount of investment that will require, of which the ship-related part is actually the smallest part, because the biggest investment will have to come on land in the supply chain and also, of course, in the bunkering infrastructure. And with an economic crisis upon our hands, of course, that questions the ability to fund what is necessary. And we have seen the calculations that the Getting to Zero Coalition has brought in, and they are huge. Now, luckily, we do still see that commitment from, let's say, the leading parts in the industry to move forward. But I think we need to have that discussion as to how are we going to finance that, and maybe that part of the discussion also in IMO needs to maybe get a bit fast-tracked now as a result of the crisis. We maybe need to start earlier discussions about MBMs, about that sort of things than we were planning to do initially. But good to hear their commitment is there, absolutely.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think the pandemic generates lots of confusion, and there are questions raised. But still, I mean, I think it was very clear, made very clear by IMO member states that with this strategy in place, we have a clear vision, we have a clear framework, and now we need to accelerate. And I think the Secretary General has recalled this message several times recently. We need to accelerate the efforts, and it includes also a focus on how to support the uptake of alternative fuels and alternative propulsion systems. This is another agenda item actually on the table for the MEPC. Well, as which I hope we'll have time to consider in depth during the next session. But as I said, the priority for the moment was to finalize and hopefully approve the draft amendment for the short term. So that's why that's where we want to focus our efforts from now.
Okay, thank you, Camille and Patrick. Now I would like to give the floor to some of our participants who have raised their hand and to ask questions or to add some comments. First of all, I have the Anto Stanisic from the Ministry of Transport of Montenegro who wanted to put a question. Is he available? Well, if not, I move to another question put by Joris Claes from the Port Expertise, is a consultant. Who is a question addressed to all the panelists. It goes as follows. I will read it. It's on retail consumption that shall we not have to expect that the true dip will still have to come in the coming month, as all warehouses, distribution centers and shops, as there was no consumption for 3 months. Retail sector does not expect to pick up on the losses experienced till earliest mid-2021. The trend graphs that have been shown do not seem to consider this expectation, which will have a huge impact on shipping and port activities in the coming 6 to 12 months. So that's the comment by Joris Claes. Would somebody in the panel would like to react to this? I can repeat the question if you want me to do, or we can give the floor to Joris himself if he wants to elaborate a little bit more on this.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, I had actually 2 questions which are very much related. The fact that we are apparently over-positivizing the future trends and expectations. The first one was more related to the overall international trade, whereby lots of industries are now really considering this redistribution of their production and manufacturing facilities, which will seriously impact global supply chains and transportation, and therefore also the ports. And then the second part was more related to a specific sector, namely the retail sector, whereby we may not see today the effect of the crisis in terms of shipments, but with overfilled warehouses, shops being filled up still, consumption being down and will continue to express a downtrend in the next 2 to 6 months. Also, that will have an effect on shipping and port handling cargo. So that's in a nutshell my 2 areas.
Okay, so would anybody in the panel would like to react? Either Patrick or Olaf?
It's a bit difficult to react to this because I think what I showed was only the WTO prediction of, which then also has to take into account several scenarios. But I'm sure you're right that, if you look at the impact of different sectors and for different sectors, they will have diverse impacts, and, depending on what type of port you are and what type of business you are in, the implications may be more severe than what the general trend is predicting. My sort of analysis was only to show the general trend from a global perspective. I don't really have detailed information that could either support or contradict what Joris is saying, but maybe Olaf has more detailed information or Paul.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your question. I think actually most of it is probably also relating to the assessment of Paul Touré, who seemed to be fairly optimistic, an optimism that I'm not sure that I fully share. I think it's also difficult to say, of course, but if you look at the indicators that we have at the moment, I think there are certain indicators that show that this crisis might, for the shipping sector, actually be worse than the financial crisis that we've seen. In other aspects, it's not yet the case, but we don't know exactly how this is going to develop. Of course, the crisis so far has been driven by 2 factors: this temporary stop of export from China production, and then, of course, a temporary stop or decline of the imports, so the consumption in most of the Western world and Asia, of course. Now, of course, what we'll see is how this is going to develop. There were certain inventories that were depleted. There's going to be this effect, and of course, there is going to be the effect of economic activity, of bankruptcies, of other economic activity that will have an impact on trade as well. So that is for the short term. Of course, for the longer term, you're right. There might be supply chains that will be reconfigured. Of course, there seem to be some political ambition to center more on some strategic goods, and this should be more regionalized. It should be less dependent on other countries. Well, these are, let's say, political statements. Of course, in practice, what we'll see is that a lot of supply chains are, let's say, directed by the decisions of the shippers, of the manufacturers of this world. So that, I think, will drive the whole discussion on reshoring or not. There might be a tendency, we already see this, and this might continue, and this crisis might actually accelerate it. But of course, as others have said, and that is my final word, a lot of it is still really very uncertain.
I just interrupt.
Oui, j'interromps une seconde. L'exemple de la distribution du détail mentionné par notre président Santiago García Milá à Barcelone, on a tenu des discussions.
Usual. I think this also emphasizes or reinforces actually the plea for ports to be a lot more closely involved, let's say, with the actual industry and with trade than we are before. And that relates to what I said in the slide. You know, we're obsessed with volume in the shipping industry, and I know Santiago will like what I'm saying now because it's one of his main principles, and it's actually maybe another reason now to have a much closer relationship between port authorities and industries, whether it's retail or whether it's others, and sort of reinvent the business concept that we are working on, which so far has been, you know, boxes and number of people in the cruise industry. So that maybe calls for a rethink the way we do business.
Thank you both, Patrick and Olaf, for responding. I think we are all in a situation where we have lots of questions, and only in the coming months, up to a year, I think we will see the true trends reflecting in different industries, and that also will reflect in the shipping and the port industries.
Okay, thank you. And now we have just time for a last question. I would like to announce as well that since we are much behind the schedule, we will try to shorten the very last session, the concluding session, in order to give more time to discussions. So I suggest to take this last question now and then have just a very quick 5-minute break just to stretch and refresh a little bit, and then we continue with the next session. So now I would like to give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of Transport of Montenegro. Please, Mr. Anto Stanisic, the floor is yours. Okay, I think we'll ask him. So it's time to for a short 5-minute breaks. Maybe we will have the opportunity to raise this question again in the next session, and let's restart again in 5 minutes time. Thank you. Hello, welcome back. We're going to start the second session, and now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Philippe Guillaumet, Secretary General of the Medports Association, who will be moderating this session. So thank you, Philippe. The floor is yours.
Merci, Francesco.
Thank you, Francesca. Good morning, everyone. I hope the communication is good and that you can hear me properly. It is with great pleasure that I can moderate, I can chair this second session. On behalf of Medport Association, it's a pleasure to work with you, the Union for the Mediterranean. I think we are going to continue our collaboration, which will be strengthened with concrete results. Very quickly, I will give the floor to our eminent experts, but I would like to underline the incredible reactivity, agility of the ports that they have shown during this severe crisis. We know how to maintain activity, guaranteeing the safety of the activities. Within this Medport Association, we promoted dialogue amongst all the members who represent 70% of the port traffic in the Mediterranean, which is starting to be important. We could prove that we had this capacity to react and this capacity of being proactive during the crisis. We are going to tackle the future, the upcoming future for marine transport. And it is important that we can give the floor to the experts who will tell us about the future. Let me end up by saying that Medport Association, as many of the listeners know, Medport Association is here to work for all and to guarantee that there will be a recovery if we act together. We are working within our technical committees to prepare to facilitate the retake of activities. That's facilitation, what is all about, with the first speaker, to whom I will very quickly give the floor. We have the head facilitation who works at the International Maritime Organization, IMO, Julian Garcia, who will take the floor. Afterwards, someone I am lucky to know from some time, Marc Assaf from the ACNUSED, and afterwards I will try to pronounce it properly. I will be prudent. Mr. Osilovsky from DG Move, and finally Madame Eleni Asteriou, Policy Officer at the DG Move of the European Commission. Our four speakers will tell about recommendations how marine transport will serve all the markets in the Mediterranean and throughout Europe, and also they will tell us about the changes that will take place. There will be a quick roundtable amongst the Mediterranean port authorities and shipping lines, and they will tell us about the projections according to about COVID. We have more than 150 people listening to us in France. It's time for lunch, and I know it is very important, but it's a huge, nice number. I want to underline the high level of participation of representatives of the Mediterranean ports. We have up to 150 participants, attendees from the 5 continents, and this work done by the UFM has been very fruitful. If Mr. Julian Abril Garcia is ready, can I give the floor to him? Julian? Okay. Hello, Julian. Buenos días. Thanks for your presentation, taking into account that we are behind the schedule. It is the role of the moderator. Please respect the time schedule, and we are listening to you. Julian, you have the floor.
Very good morning, good afternoon to all. I would like to ask, if you can put the first slide of my presentation on the screen. That's fine. Thank you very much. As my colleague Camille has mentioned before, IMO we have been working in the Secretariat since March from home, and we have had like two main actions. One is to prepare the organization to the return to the normality for seminars and meetings in IMO, but at the same time we have been working hard to provide assistance to maritime industry and member states in order to minimize as much as possible the impact of COVID-19 to the maritime traffic. I'm going to explain now the measures we have taken so far. Next slide, please. You can see there an overview of the presentation. I'm going to speak first of what technical advice we have disseminated for member states and maritime industry, and we have issued through IMO circular letters. Another very important topic is the importance of human factor and the well-being of seafarers. This is one priority for the International Maritime Organization and for the Secretary General. Also, I'm going to speak about the collaboration we are currently developing with shipping industry, with other UN agencies, and I'll also give you some information on where you can find more information in our website. This, as you can see, this is what we are doing so far. And you can imagine that this pandemic, it will have a big impact in IMO instruments. And this is something that we will have to discuss in future meetings in the different committees and council. But this will take some time, and it will have an impact on instruments like SOLAS Convention, but in particular to the Facilitation Convention. We will need to update what is the Facilitation Convention to reflect what we have learned from the COVID-19. Next slide, please. You can see in this slide the list of the circular letters that IMO has issued so far. To facilitate the management of the information, we have issued as a circular 4204 and numerous of addendum, up to 18 so far. The first one is we issued in January and provides information and guidance on precautions to be taken to minimize risk to seafarers, passengers, and others on board ships from COVID-19. And this information was based on the recommendations provided by the WHO. Addendum 1 was related to implementation and enforcement of relevant IMO instruments. This circular in particular gives to flag state authorities, port state authorities, and control regimes, companies and shipmasters, the mandate that they need to cooperate in the current context of the outbreak to ensure that where appropriate, passengers can be embarked and disembarked, cargo operations can occur, ships can enter and depart shipyards for repair and survey, and stores and supplies can be loaded. Addendum 2 is a joint statement between IMO and WHO on the response to the COVID-19 outbreak. And the main aspect that I can highlight at this moment is that we call the attention that they need to respect requirements of free practice for ships and also proper care for all travelers, prevention of unnecessary delays for ships while recognizing need to prevent a spread of disease. At 3, it was operational consideration for managing COVID-19 cases outbreak on board prepared by WHO. And this circular contains WHO guidance relevant for the shipping, in particular information on passenger ships, actions prior to boarding, managing a suspected case on board a ship, or measures on board the ship. At 4 is related to the guidance for ship operators for protection of the health of seafarers. This is a guidance, a detailed guidance prepared by ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping, and is for all ships operating in international waters. At 5 is a guidance relating to the certification of seafarers and fishing vessel personnel. This is an important guidance, is to provide guidance what to do in case seafarers and fishing vessel personnel see that their certificates is expired, and is like a guidance to take a pragmatic and practical approach to both member states and also in particular to port state control authorities, what to do in case they find seafarers with the certificates that are expired. At 6 is related preliminary list of recommendations for governments prepared by the broad group of global industry. And the recommendations addresses providing access to berths in ports, measures to facilitate crew changes in ports, measures to facilitate port and related operations, and measures to ensure health protection in ports. And in particular, urges to designate professional seafarers, regardless of nationality, as key workers. At 7, addresses difficulties faced by ship builders, equipment suppliers, ship owners, surveyors, and service engineers in respect of timely delivery of ships due to COVID-19 pandemic. At 8 contains a joint statement of the port state control regimes, recommending all the port state control regimes a practical and flexible approach, recognizing that exceptions, waivers, and extension to certificates have been granted by many flag states, and relevant information has been already circulated by IMO. Please, next slide. At 9 is a joint statement between IMO and WCO, the World Customs Organization, on the integrity of the global supply chain during the pandemic. And it is requested in particular to Customs Administration and port state authorities to establish a coordinated and proactive approach together with all concerned agencies to ensure integrity and continued facilitation of global supply chain so that flow of goods by sea is not unnecessarily disrupted. At 10 is a joint statement between IMO, WHO, and ILO on 3 aspects: medical certificates of seafarers, ship sanitation certificates, and medical care of seafarers in the context of the pandemic. This provides guidance on what to do with the certificate of medical certificates that is going to expire, also the expired of ship sanitation certificates, and in particular the need to provide access to seafarers for medical care in ports. At 11, disseminate the European Commission guidelines on protection of health, repatriation and travel arrangements for seafarers, passengers and other personnel on board ships. At 12 is the declaration of by port authorities roundtable members. At 13 addresses the needs of workers in the offshore energy sector. At 14 is an important guidance prepared by the maritime industry, establishing a framework of protocols to facilitate the crew exchange. At 15 provides information guidance on the use of PPE. Is prepared by IMO based on WHO information. At 16 provides further guidance on the use of PPE and risk assessment approach on the use of the PPE. At 17 is related to information for those responsible of port state control, port community systems and a single window to prepare the new era. And it's not included in the list, but yesterday we issued Act 18 related to the joint statement by IMO, ICAO, and ILO, calling for urgent action on crew changes and key work designation for sea and air workers. Next slide, please. Next slide. As mentioned before, the support of seafarers is a priority, and the Secretary General of IMO established in the Secretariat a seafarers crisis team that is continuously providing assistance to seafarers in individual cases. We receive emails and information from seafarers or families, and we try to use our networking and diplomatic access to try to support and provide assistance and find solutions for the problems. Mainly the problems are related to the difficulties on the crew exchange and also the problem of access to medical care. We have also, the Secretary General also have issued a special message to support of seafarers, and we have supported initiative like the Port Sound, the Whistles, also mentioned by Patrick in this previous session. Next slide, please. We have also established a strong collaboration with the shipping industry during this time, and we have issued by means of IMO circulars some of the guidance prepared by the industry, as I mentioned before. We also participate actively in an industry Corona strategy group that meets every week. And we are in constant cooperation with consultation with international governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. Please, next slide. We are also participating with other UN agencies. In particular, there is a new interagency coordination system in UN related to the crisis management team. We are working in a working group on travel and trade working group related to reopening borders and longer-term health implications for immigration and border management. We are also participating in the emergency committee of the WHO, and we have close cooperation with the UN agencies. Next slide. And this you can find there some links where you can find information relevant to the what IMO has produced so far. In particular, the information provided by member states on the actions taken and national actions to minimize or restrictions to the maritime traffic. And with that one, I would conclude and also like to reinforce that the main priority today for the IMO organization is to provide assistance to the seafarers. From June, more than 150,000 of crew changes have to be made monthly, and this is a huge challenge due to the restriction of the imposed by national authorities. But this is really a priority because seafarers have extended their contracts for more than 3 months, and like the last deadline of extension of certificates is middle of June. And after that one, we can see problems with ships and with that they don't have enough money for sailing. Thank you. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Julian, for this presentation. It is great to recall that we started our webinar taking into account the volumes on goods transportation, but as you know, there are seafarers working for this maritime transport, and well, we need to take into account all the recommendations that have been made. And I think that in the next presentation, Mark Asaf, Chief Human Resources Development Section, Division on Technology and Logistics at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCT. Are you ready, Mark? Yes, I'm ready. Good morning, Mark. Thank you very much for being amongst us, and I'd like to give you the floor. Please, we'd like you to try to respect these 10 minutes that were allocated, if it's possible. Thank you. Thank you very much, Philippe.
In the meantime, when I start, if you can pull out the PowerPoints, please. And I would like to thank the Union for the Mediterranean and the MedPorts Association for bringing me in this panel. And without waiting and all protocol observed, I'll say hi to all the participants, and we can go to slide number 2 in full screen. Yes, please, if you can put the slideshow on and slide number 2. Yeah, very good. It's coming. I don't have it on my screen. Huh? I don't know if it's working. Yes. Yeah, now full screen, please, and slide number 2. Maybe you have to push on enable editing. Yeah, okay. Slide 2, perfect. It's not full screen, excellent. So let's look at the background and in relation to all the previous speakers. What is very amazing in this time is we're talking about measures that were taken because of this COVID-19 around 216 countries, areas, and territories as defined by the UN at a speed that is light speed, just something incredible. And with this word that we all know now, closed border, restricted travel, grounded airplanes, the physical distancing, yeah, Patrick was mentioning about it, containment and quarantine. And the expectations from the Statistical Commission of the UN, minus 27%, trade value down. When you look at the cover of The Economist on the left side, you could see the globe, and with the big name on it, closed. Not so long ago, years ago, they were talking about the gated globe because of the commercial disputes, but now we are completely closed. And consequence is choking off to global supply chains, including the one on oceans. And new vocabulary to the likes of the Great Depression, or they call it the Great Lockdown. It's an economic fallout near standstill. So we have this movement of the goods that is blocked, and also the workers that need actually to keep the world economy alive. Let's look at slide 3, please. So the background, we have to remember what we, sorry, this is slide, yeah. There's something on the, yeah, okay. The title is different, but it's the main goal. What we have to look at together with port authorities around the world is the main goal, is that the port operations are continuing under this pandemic or whatever pandemic we might be facing in the future. We have to remember that ports are national strategic assets. We need to keep those supply chains open, in particular for vital merchandise, but that needs to be defined also. What is a vital merchandise for which country, which region? Allow this maritime trade to continue and protect the critical staff in their daily tasks. And the intervention from my colleague from IMO was very good in that sense. The ports are front row actors to stop the spread, but let the goods through. Slide 4, sorry, the next one. So what we have done at the level of UNCTAD, and in particular the Train for Trade port network that some members know, is that we, from the very beginning, and we started mid-March, we're in the lockdown at the office, we started to collect and be in touch with our members to collect documentation on measure, observation, what has been done, and I'll just go to a few bullet points that serves as generic guidelines. And I want to thank also our port partners, including the Port of Marseille Force, Dublin and Valencia, I know they're online, for providing this documentation and our members. The physical distancing, okay, that is quite common. Preventive hygiene measures, interaction, trying to limit the interaction between onboard, onshore staff, and actually that led to some issues at the time. The way of communicating with the quayside, the use of digital documentation, absolutely, to limit the human contact to the minimum, provide sufficient protective equipment, and we know, in particular in Europe, there was a lot of issues on that, with stocks, no stocks, at the States level, in the port level, face mask, gloves, and sanitizer, and so on. Introduce sanitation routine of surfaces in regular contact with hands. And I've put here this one, facilitate seafarers rotation as per IMO protocols for what, and this is the new one done with several agencies to comply with international maritime regulation. We have to remember that we're talking about 1.2 million seafarers out there and a rotation of 150 to 200,000. That is problematic. Next slide, please. Establish points of controls in the perimeter of port area. I know a lot of ports are calculating every square meter they have to use it for efficiency, but this is something that probably gonna have to look at in more details. Equipment to measure temperature. I've seen in some ports in the Middle East, they're using those smart helmets where the police officers can measure temperature and other vitals at distance, 6 meters distance away. So they're starting to sell them. Establish waste disposal policies, fumigation, disinfection, the tracking of passengers information system. And I think it was reminded by one of the speakers, Patrick, that how far do we want to go in the tracking and what is the national regulation, international regulation about it. Define isolated holding and testing areas for the COVID, decontamination, delivery of essential medical supply, as well as fuel, water, spare parts, and all the likes. Institute a protocol for disembarking passengers who requiring immediate medical care. And this is again under the ILO Maritime Labour Convention of 2006, because in times of crisis, also have to remember we are linked by those international conventions. And I've put in the gray area the disinfect and monitor cargo. We do not have much information on that, and we know that some places they do have some special equipment to do it, but we would like to have more info. Next slide. Based on all those elements, we also propose a generic crisis protocol based on a color basis. So you see from green to red with different levels. And according to when you have cases in your country, all the way to the port area and the number of staff that are sick. There are much more details that you can consult with the link that you see there under, which tft.uncta.org, and a special one on port COVID. So I will let you go through it if you're interested. This is a generic protocol to be used and put at your own pace. And I know that the WCO, World Customs Organization, and also the IAPH are proposing their protocols now, much more elaborated, with a lot of activities on communication also, which are very interesting. Next slide, please. Now, what next? That is what is at stake. What do we next? One element that we really have to remember, because it's taken granted for many people, and it's not the case in places we are working as UNCTAD with our 194 member states, is the connectivity. The connectivity, as the World Bank Group puts it, it's a public good, and we need to boost internet. There's a lot of cases where people have had problems to connect, and this is something even at the port authority level or your port community, you need to make sure that your employees, your clients, your stakeholders have this proper connectivity to organize these sessions and be able to function on the vital ones. Increased connectivity also when you look at what the World Economic Forum is saying in the data exchange of global supply chains, interoperability, and that comes to what was mentioned before, the port community systems. And also I know the World Economic Forum is pushing on blockchain, but that's for you to decide. Shorter, more diversified and regional supply chains. Yes, that's the push for it. Know how it's going to be organized and for which products we will see. Relocation, supported by advanced automation and related to labor cost reduction. We're not going to change the economic model over time. So there's still the cost effect linked to that. Port regional cooperation, I think there was some elements about it. Hard as a region, and this is probably going to be a very interesting question for Medport, is there a way we could cooperate between all those ports and to make it more resilient as a trade node in itself for that particular region? The CSR, on corporate social responsibility, we have had fantastic examples from the port authorities and port community to help out reach the most vulnerable, because they really suffered and still suffering during this crisis. Designing new policies for ports to build stronger resilience. This is the future. And the push for online training and certification, you could see already happening. The real question is to what percentage? We don't want to go from one extreme to another, from 0 to 100%, but we need to strike the right balance. And from our side, we're going to develop a new Train for Trade course based on the request we're receiving from the members that will be called Building Port Resilience Against Pandemics, because there could be others. And we'll develop it thanks to the United Nations Development Account. We have a bit of funding for that, and we'll involve our partners. And that will be proposed for all the port communities free in the future. My next slide is just to show you, if you can go to the next slide, the network. So those who have collected information in the 4 languages and our port partners that I want to thank. And I will finish with the last slide. If we can pull it with 2 links. The first link is on UNCTAD, the main web page. You see page coronavirus, where we have a lot of documentation and protocols related to trade macroeconomy policy that you can consult about coronavirus. And the second link is the one dedicated to ports and COVID under the Train for Trade program. And I want to finish by thanking you all, and also thanking the organizer for giving me access to this panel. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Marc.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm always very interested, and it's amazing the work that you did at the UNCET. It is very important for all the port authorities. The UNCTAD has made a big effort. All the members have been involved with you in order to better develop this kind of works and research, and we'll have the opportunity to exchange more ideas in the future. It is important that all the institutions and entities to get together and to gather all the information and the decisions that have been taken in all the ports. Thank you very much. I'm convinced that we'll have a lot of questions from the audience, but we'll have time for answering the questions at the end of the session. Before giving the floor to Simon Osilowski, which is the program manager at the Unit D1, Maritime Transport and Logistics, DG Move, European Commission. We must say that we at Medport Association, we have a compilation of best practices that were developed in our ports in the Mediterranean region. And if you go to our website, you will be able to find all the information. And Patrick, I don't know if you are amongst us now, but you know that we work together with the UNCTAD as well as DG Move to develop different strategies and different programs and different guidelines to gather the best practices. And the UNCTAD, the Medport Association, and many other entities have been worked in order to have these best practices. I'd like to give the floor to Simon Osilowski. Please, if you are here, I'd like to give you the floor. Please, you have the floor. You only have 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Simon. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will also express myself in English if possible. I will not really...
Mais le français est très très bon, visiblement.
However, your French is great too, right?
Make a big pain for you with my French, so I will continue in English if I can. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you. So thank you for the invitation. As you said, I'm representing the European Commission, the department in charge of mobility and transport, and we are dealing in a small unit with maritime transport and logistics. And today, with my colleague Nelly Asteriou, we are planning to report you some the most, let's say, the most important measures which were taken at the EU level to combat to address the coronavirus crisis. If you can, oh, the presentation is on. Because I'm sure you addressed this point very in detail in the morning session. I will not repeat your discussions, but in general, according to the latest Commission estimates, it's forecasted that the EU economy will shrink by 7%, which is huge. This will be a huge impact for everybody, for all the businesses, including maritime sector. Of course, the pandemic hit the maritime very much, all segments, but not equally. Some segments are more touched, like the passenger transport cruise segment. We were in contact with many stakeholders to think together how we can help them, how we can solve the problems. And as a result of this discussion with different stakeholders, well, there is a set of measures which have been proposed at the EU level by the Commission together with the Parliament and the Council, and also by the other EU institutions. In my presentation today, in our presentation today, I will focus more on the horizontal measures, economic measures, which have been conducted by the EU, and my colleague Nelly will report more specific actions, more specific for the maritime transport. If you can move the slide, please. We know that over the last couple of weeks, there was a very specific support needed. Immediate support, very urgent support, in principle, to provide liquidity to the companies, to the industry, to the economic operators, and that was the immediate response from the EU. We call them relief measures, so very short term, very targeted, just to keep economic operators alive. This was also the case, of course, for the maritime and in general for the whole supply chain, because, of course, the role of the transport sector was essential to maintain the supplies of the food and other health material and other important merchandise to the citizens. But then for long term and medium term, we need to think about the recovery measures. And this is also my pleasure to announce that today, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will have a speech in the European Parliament today, just after our webinar. I think the latest information I got, it's 1:30, I think. And when she will report the plans of the Commission, the proposal of the Commission, better to say, for the recovery package, a financial recovery package as a part of the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years. So I think that is definitely worth following up, and I would invite you to have a look at the European Parliament's website to see what the Commission is proposing for the next years. Okay, we can move slides. As I said, for the short-term measures, there was a set of very, very important, let's say, economic instruments conducted or launched by the European Commission, and also together with the other EU institutions. I would mention the most important ones, like Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative, that was briefly about activating unspent cohesion funds. So that was a very quick help for the EU member states, especially those which are really taking benefit of the EU cohesion policy, to redirect the priorities and to provide aid to the most let's say vulnerable sectors. And the total value of this instrument is estimated at the level of 37 billion euro. In general, I had a look at one of the Commission websites, which calculated the general impact of all the measures which were undertaken by the European Union, and that was really incredible amount because this website mentions 3.5 trillion euro of funds mobilized to address coronavirus crisis. This is incredible. I think most of these, let's say, funds were mobilized by the temporary framework for state aid. As you know, in the European Union, there is a quite rigid framework for the state aid in order to ensure level playing field for all the economic operators. And then in the time of pandemics, in the times of pandemic, the Commission decided, of course, to make this framework more flexible to enable member states undertake very targeted actions to support businesses with liquidity, with specific state aid schemes. So this measure itself generated almost 2.5 trillion euro in different member states. That's an incredible figure again. There were other very important measures. So, for example, activation of the general escape clause under the Stability and Growth Pact. So that was providing some necessary flexibility to the European fiscal framework, just to loosen the rules for the member states to let them support their economies. And also there was a new, very new instrument for temporary support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency. SURE, it's called in abbreviation. This is about supporting jobs and people at work. So the value of this instrument is around 1 billion euro. Which will be used to cover part of the expenses to be borne by member states for creating, for maintaining and extending short-term work schemes. Can you move the slides, please? All these measures are, of course, complemented by dedicated programs launched by the European Central Bank, European Investment Bank Group, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So altogether, it's a big package of financial support for the EU economy. Perhaps I will not go into the details because we don't have much time. However, if you are interested in details of these recovery packages launched by the financial institutions at the EU level, of course, we'll be happy to provide you with the relevant information. Of course, many actions are undertaken at the level of the member states. I got recently kind of document summarizing all the actions made by the EU member states, and this document has 72 pages. So you can imagine how many different schemes to support economy and support businesses were launched in the European Union. Finally, I would like to mention also the EU funding framework, which was readapted a bit in the Connecting Europe facility, which is managed at the central EU level. We introduced some extra flexibility for the beneficiaries, not to penalize them for any delays, for example. So this is also very small measures, but very much appreciated by some beneficiaries. Of course, they couldn't really implement their projects properly during the time of the coronavirus crisis. And then, of course, we keep our financial instruments working. There are some specific instruments which are dedicated for the for the transport and also for the maritime sector in particular. I can mention, of course, Connecting Europe Facility. This is the main instrument, but also EFSI, European Fund for Strategic Investment, European Investment Bank own risk financing. We have very specific dedicated instruments to support transport investments. For example, we have, of course, Motorways of the Sea. We have transport blending, self-transport blending facility, green shipping guarantee program, future mobility program, and so on. So there is a long list of different programs which are still open, and then potential applicants can apply for their projects. Of course, I will not spend much time on it because this would be, the topic for another presentation. Now, perhaps I will invite my colleague Nelly to report specific measures. I think I saw one question from the audience. I think the question will be answered by Nelly. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi. Good afternoon. Kalispera from. Oui.
Allez-y, madame.
Oui. Excusez-moi. Bonsoir, Kalispera, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the Commission's measures in order to confront the COVID-19 outbreak. Can we move to the next slide, please? So, as Simon mentioned earlier, I would briefly present transport maritime specific measures, starting by guidelines for border management measures in order to protect health and ensure the availability of goods and essential services. Also, there is a communication from the Commission on the implementation of the green lanes under the guidelines for border management measures in order to protect the health and ensure the availability of goods and essential services. Guidelines on the protection of health, repatriation and travel arrangements for seafarers. A proposal for the amendment to the Ports Service Regulation in order to give to Member States and port authorities additional flexibility to waive, reduce, suspend, or even defer port infrastructure charges. Next slide. We have also published interpretative guidelines concerning passenger rights on how certain provisions of the EU passenger rights legislation should be applied in the context of the outbreak. Another proposal was made for a regulation laying down specific and temporary measures in view of the outbreak concerning the validity of certain certificates, licenses and authorizations, as well as the postponement of certain periodic checks and training in certain areas of transport legislation. There is also a network of national transport contact points in order to reinforce cooperation and coordination on the issues related to transport, setting up a website which provides an overview of national transport measures by country. Next slide. Finally, the exit strategy that should be mentioned is a tourism and transport package, which gradually lift the travel restrictions from 13th of May with guidelines of general principles for the gradual resumption of passenger transport and detailed recommendations for measures in the maritime sector. First of all, an overall strategy towards a recovery in 2020 and beyond. a common approach to restoring free movement and lifting restrictions at the EU internal borders in a gradual and coordinated way, a framework to support the gradual re-establishment of transport while ensuring the safety of passengers and staff, a recommendation which aims to make travel vouchers an attractive alternative to cash reimbursement for consumers, and criteria for restoring tourism activities safely and gradually for developing and also for developing health protocols for hospitality establishments such as hotels. Now I was very quick as time flies. I will give again the floor to my colleague Simon to continue, and then I will complement the last slide.
Nelly, I would suggest that we will just skip the we will skip the next slide because I already mentioned the recovery package to be announced by the president. So you can go ahead with the last slide.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Simon. Other relevant initiatives that we already took on board is from our part, a new fuel EU Maritime initiative, which is already known, in order to support the uptake of alternative fuels for maritime, to accelerate the use of electrification of short distance shipping, and to pave the way for decarbonization of marine fuels. Finally, there is the sustainable finance strategy and the taxonomy regulation as a possible support to the transition towards a sustainable recovery and the basis to assess the environmental sustainability of economic activities and investments. With that slide, we concluded our presentation in relation to the measures adopted or will be adopted by the Commission, and we would like to thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much, Elena or Eleni, for these talks about the measures implemented by the EU. As a Mediterranean, I want to encourage the European Commission to have a look at what happens in the Mediterranean when we are talking about the interest of extending these measures to the neighboring countries. This is very relevant so we can keep a cohesion within this region between Europe and Africa. This was my first reaction. Thank you very much. We can see that the efforts made by the EU to support reactivity is major and very relevant. I am happy with that, and of course I think we are in the good direction. Some questions are raised. It is already 1 p.m. We are still lots of people following this webinar. We will keep your questions. There are some talks, some feedbacks which seem very interesting to us, so everyone has clear in mind what has happened and what could happen at the level of port operations. We still have 4 subjects. We will have 3 presentations on traffic. Do we need new trading routes? The port of Valencia will give us the short presentation, a 5-minute presentation about operations concerning passengers. We will have traffic and passengers. The Port of Barcelona will talk also, and we will have a talk by the Port of Béjaïa in Algeria. And as for training, there will be a talk by the Mediterranean Institute of Training of Tunisia. So we will have the southern bank and the northern bank of the Mediterranean. I will give the floor to the Port of Valencia. Juan, are you here, or is it Anna? The Port of Valencia. Valencia, can you hear us? Juan is here, Juan Manuel, okay. Nice to see you. You have the floor. Just before Juan talks, Mrs. Asteriou has to leave us because she has another webinar. We want to thank her on behalf of the UFM, Eleni and Simon. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Medports Association and to the Union for the Mediterranean for giving us the opportunity of sharing with you a little bit how we are feeling this crisis as a port. I have prepared a very brief presentation. I don't know if it's possible to see it. And yeah, if not, I can try also to share it. Okay. So if you can go to the second slide, please. I will go quickly. Okay. As many ports in the region, we have had to cope with this COVID-19 crisis through operational messages and financial messages, and also trying to cooperate with our ports and port communities as Medports, as the UNCTAD, and also as the IIPH, who has already been mentioned. Okay, I want to talk about the operational and financial measures that we have taken, because many of us we are working that, and probably will be covered in the next presentation. So we go to the next slide. I will talk about how is this affecting to our throughput as a port. As you may know, we finished 2019 with 5.4 million TEUs, and as the leading West Med container port. But just for the first quarter, we've already suffered close than a 5% reduction in our container traffic, mainly in empty and gateway empty traffic, but also the gateway traffic for loaded containers and the transit has been suffering. That is making us, if you look to the graphic on the left of the slide, you will see how from the peak in 2019, the traffic has been slowly and now abruptly descending. And so we think we are still waiting we are finishing the sanitary crisis, but we probably are still waiting for a peak of the economic and also the trade crisis. We've reduced our traffic forecast consequently to -9% for this 2019. And please, next slide. We've been also following how is this affecting the price. As you may know, we have Valencia, the Valencia Container Freight Index, which is the only freight index for the Mediterranean, and we have realized that this, of course, we have also this is a crisis of the beginning of demand, but also of offer, but also demand, and well, by the moment, the carriers are trying to keep their prices, and in fact, I think we think that conjuncturally it grew during the last period in April. So please, next slide. So what we are thinking now is, what about the future? So we are here with my colleague Eva Perez from Fundación Valencia Power and her team. We've been working in defining 3 possible scenarios for 2025. The first of all will be, of course, the base one, business as usual, and in which we think that well, in the aftermath of the crisis, we will recover the business as it was with well, a little bit more protectionism maybe in the way it was going in the trend that we had before, and also well, with the same Sinocentric general trade flows. We have other one which is much more pessimistic, which is the protectionism will increase, and with all the problems that will produce in the global economy. And of course, we want try to be optimistic in line with the messages we receive from the European Commission and from other interveners before, trying to think that this is an opportunity of changing our model and also trying to imbalance or rebalance a little bit better the globalization, but also thinking on green and changing our model of growth for the coming years. So please, next slide. This brings us to to the forecast for the three scenarios. The pessimistic one, the protectionist, will lead us to a compound annual growth rate of -9% of traffic. So we will not recover the traffic as it was before the crisis. In the business as usual, we will recover, but not before the 2022. And with the optimistic view, we think that we can begin to recover in 2021, and that will give us also more steadily growth in the near future. Business one. But nevertheless, with the trends we've been also checking with the reality is that in any case, the reduction of the traffic will be clear. So we are facing probably a problem of overcapacity, of imbalance between offer and demand in the Med. So we will probably have to think in that in the coming year we will have to suffer some adjustment in the region in terms of fleet allocation, and also problems the carriers will suffer with this imbalance. Please, last slide. Last one, please. Okay, so what we can expect from the container market? Many of these ideas have been already mentioned from previous speakers. Of course, the trade, there's a big risk of trade contraction, and also we will have problems for the carriers, that probably they will have problems for adjusting, need to adjust capacity. Also, they will have problems with the results, and that will be problems already also for the traffic crossing the Mediterranean. We will suffer. We will see probably more integration, more we'll maybe move to only 2 alliances, reducing also the capacity for the Med traffic, and integration of the carriers in the door-to-door logistic change in order to gain competitiveness. And also we'll have some by-side problems for the environment, as with the prices of the fuel foils, we are probably they will have a lack of incentive to invest in the scrubbers or retrofit the fleet. And also more and more we are seeing already that more and more carriers are avoiding the Med route for the Good Hope route, and that will also affect the traffic in the whole of the Mediterranean. So, and that's all I wanted to share. Thank you very much for the time. Hope not to have taken a lot of it. And thank you for this initiative, because I think it's very important that we share this experience all together within the Mediterranean.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan Manuel. Thank you for this presentation. It has been very interesting when we talk about the fear of port authorities, and you underscored at the end of your presentation, because at the end of the day we fear to lose the alternative that the European Mediterranean ports when compared with the southern Mediterranean ports. It is important that all the region to get together and to be competitive. This is what we are doing, Juan. You, as Valencia Port, you are one of the most engaged stakeholders at the Euromed Association, and this Mediterranean region is going to be efficient, always respecting the environment, in order to get better integrated in the European market. I think that your presentation is great for this webinar. I'd like to give the floor now to our colleague from Barcelona. Juan talked a little bit about the containers transportation, and Jordi, responsible for the strategies, is going to offer us an overview of the whole transport system in Barcelona, and is going to offer us a different perspective on passengers before we give the floor to Betaya Port and Metnit in Tunisia. Jordi, are you there?
Voilà, Jordi, tu m'en voudras pas pour te souhaiter.
Please, happy birthday, Jordi. Happy birthday, because now you are 36 years old, and it is a pleasure.
Thank you for the congratulations. I will try to go fast as we are behind schedule. I guess the only ones that are not eating lunch is the Spaniards, because the rest should be eating lunch, so we are keeping them from lunch. Let me say just four basic things in less than 10 minutes. First, say that predicting the future is a very risky business. If we look backwards to the past now, and we see the latest revolutions, crises that have happened, very few people predicted them. When Toyota reinvented logistics and supply chain in the 50s, nobody predicted that this would happen in a country like Japan that just lost the Second World War. When China became the factory of the world in the 90s, I would say that at the end of the 70s, nobody predicted that. Very few people predicted the financial crisis in 2008. And very few people predicted that a crisis like the coronavirus could have the impact that it had on the economies and the logistics sector. No? So sometimes better than hearing to people like me, like at the head of strategies, better to look at artists like Steven Spielberg, series like Black Mirror, that sometimes they tend to predict future better than us. Okay. This as an introduction. Let me say that the way I see it, this crisis will probably speed up some trends that we were already seeing before it happened. If we look at the main drivers of growth of maritime trade in the last 30 years, basically thinking about the Mediterranean and basically about Europe. If we see at the 4 or 5 main drivers, most of them were already showing some decline before the COVID-19 crisis. No? The 4 main drivers behind the increase of traffic in the Med, but also in Europe in the last years, were an increase of containerization. It has been stable, pretty stable at 12% of maritime traffic in the last 10 years. Liberalization of trade, thanks to the transfer of production to Asian countries. We have also seen a decline since 2007. The growth of liquid bulks, basically oil and refined products, growth of chemicals, and growth of the automotive industry. All these sectors that have fostered the growth of maritime trade in the region in the last 30 years, we're already seeing signs of decline before the COVID crisis. Cruise business and passengers was another sector that had been growing, and this is probably something that we have to treat separately. So I think that the COVID-19 crisis will probably speed up these trends that already existed in the past, and as a summary, we're never going to see, at least in Europe, the increase in trade in containers, in cars, in liquid bulks that we have seen in the last 30 years. No? Second thing I wanted to say, what have this crisis demonstrated? 4 or 5 things, I believe. One, global supply chains work pretty well. despite shortages of masks and some health equipment, in general, we haven't seen shortages of basic goods, of consumer goods in most countries, even with lockdown. So I would say that global supply chains work pretty well. And those thinking that this crisis will bring back industry to Western Europe, etc., I'm not so sure, because they work pretty well. Okay. Second, e-commerce. E-commerce, now that people have been in lockdown, hundreds of millions of people that were not using e-commerce have been used to using e-commerce. So this will foster even more the growth of e-commerce in the coming years as a consumer pattern. Second, as I said, trade will not grow, at least in Europe, the way it has been doing for the last 30 years. Not at all. I'm not expecting this, at least until we retire, for sure. So expect low growth of international trade and maritime transport. I would say another thing, but has nothing to do with, in theory, it has little to do with our business. Gender inequality. We have seen that countries that have been managed by women have reacted better to this crisis than others. We will work in a sector where men are basically all executive posts, very few women. And we have seen when it comes to treating this crisis, countries with women on top of the government in New Zealand, in Scandinavian countries, in Asian countries have managed better this crisis. So this is a lesson I think that we can think about. And fourth, disruptions are here to stay. I mean, we're going to see disruptions more frequent than before because the world is very interconnected. So something that happens in the other extreme of the planet affects us. So we have to get ready to these disruptions in forms of cyber attacks, health problems, climate change. But this is going to be more frequent than it used to be before. Third, in order to cope with this scenario, what do we need to do? I believe as sports, I would say that there's 4 or 5 things that we would all agree that are the driving forces of our changes for the coming years. One, sustainability of supply chains, very important. Second, flexibility. Supply chains, customers, exporters require flexibility, very important. Third, digitalization. Fourth, diversification of port activity, very important in order not to rely on a single segment of traffic. Fifth, resilience, being able to adapt to these disruptions, more often disruptions. So we have to be resilient, be able to respond and adapt to these disruptions. And finally, we all talk a lot about technology and digitalization, but human capital is going to be extremely important. No? And what is going to make a difference between some ports, because we all tend to have a same level of digitalization, is human capital. So investing in human capital is extremely important right now. And finally, as the fourth issue, with all these trends and how we should react, and making a very fast revision of the different segments of traffic in ports, where we see that which could grow, which could decrease, despite the situation we are now. I think in 2 years' time, the cruise business, the passenger business has a good perspective. I know that saying this today is risky in the way we are, but I believe that when this is over, and one day it will be over in 3 months, in 6 months, in 1 year, the cruise and the touristic sector has an important perspectives. And in the Mediterranean, more than in other places, this is the only place in the world, I would say, where you have very different countries in a very short distance, in a very short dimension. So this is something that we should all benefit. North of Africa, Western Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Europe. So this has good perspectives. Some solid bulks, cereals, agro-food. This has also good perspectives in both shores of the Mediterranean, I would say. RoRo, I think RoRo between the North of Africa, Southern Europe, between Western Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, has very good perspectives as well. Agro-food production in North of Africa is growing. Car manufacturers are setting up factories in North of Africa. All this gives a good perspective for RoRo traffic between the 2 shores of the Mediterranean. And honestly, I see bad perspectives for liquid bulks, chemicals, refined products from oil. And containers, I don't see it growing very much or at all in the coming years. I know there's some drivers that could make it grow. There's still some goods that are being containerized, cereals, soya beans, iron waste can go into containers. This can make some growth. E-commerce can boost a little bit the growth of container sector, but there's so many drivers, at least in Europe, I would say in Europe more than in the rest of the Mediterranean, that push container trade down, that I don't see the others compensating these drivers. And I'm gonna leave it here, okay? Thank you, Philippe, and I give back the floor to you. Thank you.
Merci, Jordi.
Thank you very much, Jordi. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. And it is always interesting to have this perspective when talking about logistic change and how the port authorities and this chain has not been interrupted, and the port authorities are still responsible for this equality, and they were able to keep on with the peasantry supply chain, because in Europe we can see many countries as well as many other areas in the globe where well, they try to protect themselves, and we were able to find a solution. Why? Because the supply chain has been able to work in this sense, always keeping security for seafarers and all the professionals. Thank you very much for this presentation. Patrick Verhoeven from the APH is leaving the room. Thank you very much for your kind contribution. I hope to see you soon. We will be talking about our future collaboration. Thank you very much, Patrick. Now I'd like to give the floor to our colleague from Béjaïa Port. Despite they have a board meeting, the Béjaïa Port, Mr. Ajal, that will offer us a great presentation related with the port operations. You are a port security officer, that's it, right? And I think that your contribution is going to be very interesting, Mr. Hajat. It is a pleasure to see you again. We met before, and it is always great to listen to you. We only have 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Good afternoon.
M'entendez?
Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. It is a pleasure to see you all. I will take this opportunity to thank Jordi and to greet him. I pass you this information. As you said, well, we have the administration board. I will tell you, I am the security officer of the port of Béjaïa. I am also deputy general manager. This port authority excuse us because the sound is quite cut and we don't get the sound properly. So how we were managing to deal with this situation, to face a situation that has caused much stress on the population, on our population in Algeria, in the seafarer sector, and all the measures that we had to implement to face this pandemic. We have closely worked according to the maritime international guidelines. Just to start, there was an impact of the COVID-19 on the port of Bejaria. For the first quarter 2020, there was a decrease of minus 6% of our traffic. As in many industries, taking into account the Chinese industries were locked for a couple of months. This was translated by the stopping of imports. At the very beginning, this situation was unpleasant as for the blockchain, the supply chain. As you well said before, 92% of imports are maritime imports. There was an increase, on the contrary, in the traffic of cereals. And this was probably due to the different contract in Latin America, which were not touched, which didn't suffer from the disease, at least before. And afterwards, this wave that is that is being spread over the American and Latin American countries. We had a huge impact on the traffic of passengers. All these activities was cancelled in the Algerian ports. The local authorities, the ministerial authorities, made a decision to cancel all this traffic, so we could avoid the propagation of the spread of the coronavirus. So all these activities related to passengers, passenger displacements was cancelled. We have to take into account that many tourists came from Spain, France, and Italy. In the ports of Algeria, there is also this interface navire port that we had to manage vis-à-vis the foreign seafarers who come to our ports in Algiers and in all our country. So we had to deal with these issues, and that's why we have followed all the guidelines concerning the organization, the management of these seafarers. And these seafarers are also used for other operations such as drag boats or disinfection of venues, port venues, whether they are the land dockers or the Marines who have helped to keep safe and to the sanitation of all the installations. To come back to the activities concerning the passengers, as it was said, in spite of all safety measures that we implemented to catch up a little bit all these activities, but it is true that no decisions were made. So to lose a little bit this, to untie these measures. As for the strengths between inverted commas, which are the strengths after this COVID in Algeria, we have this opportunity. There is I think that many lessons can be learned from this situation, this COVID-19 situation that we are facing. It is true that we are talking of the use sorry for the sun, which is the sound which is too cut to follow. Well, doing our best. We have the willingness to adapt our way of working to all these guidelines and all this computerized system. This COVID-19 has pushed us to accelerate this digitalization process. According to all the proceedings, the management of goods is done as much as possible. And as for the lessons learned, we will try to Yes, perhaps can you conclude? I am sorry for cutting you because we are behind the schedule. I would like to give the floor for afterwards to leave the questions and answers for afterwards. I give you the floor back. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Agel. We have to take into account that we have a very short presentation. Thank you for having been able to be with us. Please greet on my behalf Halim, who is managing this port and who is directly involved in these activities. Your Tunisian neighbor, Imel Zamit, director of the Institute, the Mediterranean Institute of Training in Tunisia. Imed, are you still here? Can I give you the floor? Yes, I am still here. Hello, Imed. Thanks for your participation. I will be tougher with you and more strict with you. Please, you have just 5 minutes in spite of all the interest raised by what you are doing. Thank you for your feedback, Ahmed. Can you activate my camera, please? Whilst our technicians well, first we have the sound, and here we get the image. So let's get started. The training sector didn't escape to this crisis, this health crisis. Ports and maritime transport have slowed down, and training is absolutely stopped stopped for 3 months. There are many consequences. We are facing a tough situation. All training institutes are facing the same situation. The contracts have been suspended, cancelled, taking into account that everyone was under lockdown. All the trainings, intermediate trainings also stopped, as our colleagues said before, so the certificates have been prolonged. There was also a gap of these training sessions that were scheduled to start in February. All this led to financial impact, a very strong impact. We have to say that we are facing a reimbursement plan of scholar fees for the trainings that should be able to start in March. Is it a case of force majeure? So we are facing a legal problem, legal consequences. We tried to find solutions, and we were addressing this issue of remote training on a legal framework. There is no legal frame that covers this remote training. It doesn't exist about professional training. We also wanted to have a course to teach on remote, but there are troubles. There is a lack of material, lack of infrastructure. There is a lack of platforms for the courses. We also have internet and computer problems. The trainers are not qualified to guarantee these remote trainings. So we would need the trainers to be trained to do so, to say so. We tried to implement a strategy to restart our activities, but the health protocols are limiting the welcome capacity of the classrooms. We're going to face this distancing situation, use of masks for teachers and for students, and we are trying to see how we can palliate to this problem. As for the pedagogical system, the return to the normal will need supplementary extra hours of school. Sorry, it seems we missed the connection now.
Yes, hello. It seems that Philip has lost its connection.
I'm back. I'm back. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm back. I have totally lost my connection. I'm sorry for that. J'avais complètement perdu ma connexion.
I completely lost my connection. I'm really sorry because I wasn't able to listen to the last part of Ahmed intervention. But really shows us the difficulties of training, which is important and vital for the future work. And we also mentioned that remote work, and well, it works very well, but we need to count with the tools with quite quality levels and to better improve connectivity. It is very important. As you witnessed, I lost my connection. Therefore, we lost some minutes that reaches to the end. Francesc, I'm talking about we have loads of questions as well as different comments, but we don't have time to, because we thought to have 3 hours, but therefore maybe we'll give the floor to Lady Fetera and Edward Rodez. Just a few words and comments and conclusions, if you don't mind, before the closing of this webinar. Francesc? Yes, but please, very, very quick. We'll give the floor to Lady Fedala, Miss Lady Fedala, that is amongst us, General Director of the Port of Morocco. You have the floor. Sorry, Mr. Fedala, I was too fast after what I read. No? Well, now I'd like to give the floor to Edward. Are you there, Edward? No. Okay, they left us. Well, if we don't have any other comments, and from my side, that's all. And we can close this session that showed the importance and how to put into common all the experiences and the need to have a Mediterranean approach. It is very important, this strategic seminar. Yes, Ms. Vitala? Yes, I'm with you. I just had an issue with my microphone. Would like to give you the floor to Francesc, which is the captain of this seminar. You have 2 minutes, Ms. Vitala. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing this conference. Well, all the institutions and all the work offer as a new possibility to strengthen the regional cooperation of this supply chain. We are working in a shared mean and medium. We have the obligation to apply international legal items. So in this crisis, we must take into account all the measures to protect all the seafarers as well as the main stakeholders and to guarantee the trade of goods and the continuity of the supply chain. As an example of the recuperation for offering the opportunity to the citizens to go back to the own countries, the Morocco opened the borders. But when we talk about tools to face this crisis, the sea has still some borders as the sea highways. I listened with a lot of interest the European strategies, but I fear that the strategy that launched today doesn't take into account the effort that has been made by southern Mediterranean ports. All the measures that have been taken should include this southern part of the Mediterranean. We don't have any kind of support. when we want to apply all the measures, everybody is there to say that we must do it, we need to do it, we have to do it, and we have to do this and that. But when we talk about support measures, we don't have any support at all. So personally, I'd like to make a personal call to all the members of our community and all the European members to take into account this southern side of the Mediterranean. I hope that it was clear and I didn't go beyond the time limitations. Thank you very much. Ms. Fatala?
Thank you, Madame Fessala. As Secretary General, I support your ideas. We are working so that our Mediterranean Sea can benefit from measures from European measures and policies. The highways of the sea are a very good example of that. I think that within this European connection program, so with the African continent, the Mediterranean has to play its major role. Edouard Rodez, who wanted to talk on behalf of the European School of Barcelona. Edouard, are you back now? So just to conclude this session that I had the pleasure to moderate, thanks to all our participants, thanks to all our attendees to this session, which was rich and which brought many ideas. I do invite all the ports that attended this webinar. I invite you to join us at the Medport Association because we have information to share with you and some works will be launched. I want to thank Francesca and the Union for the Mediterranean for having wanted to invite us to participate and co-organize this webinar, which is a success and which will be done again so we can see the consequences of this crisis. Thank you all. If there are no more questions, I will give the floor to Francesca for some closing remarks. Francesca, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Maybe first thing I would like to say is that we had foreseen this closing session to have Alberto Palacios, the technical director of CEDMO, the Center of Transport Studies for the Western Mediterranean, to help us. He has been sort of acting as rapporteur of this webinar, and he will be sharing the conclusions he had prepared for this last session with all of you. This is one first item that we will be sharing with you. So really, I am grateful for this work that has been done by Alberto Palacios in preparing these conclusions, and they will be shared with you, as I say, right after the conclusion of this webinar. That's the first thing. We'll be sharing also the presentations and the links to all the documents that the different international organizations who have participated in this webinar, links, I mean, to the documents, the guidance documents and forecasts that have been presented in this meeting. We know it's a very large field and we couldn't cover everything in this webinar. We haven't even used more time that initially expected, but we will also collect all your comments and questions in the Q&A, and we will share these questions with the panelists so they can decide whether they can react to them. That's another thing. So, but for us, the objectives of the meetings have been largely achieved. We wanted to have some guidance for our discussions for the next UFM Strategic Transport Action Plan for the region. And this has been largely achieved, as I say. And so I want to thank all of you for these fruitful discussions. Also the people who have been listening and watching through the Facebook live streaming. And already we still have, I think, almost 90 participants with us. So thanks again, and thank you thanks to Medports Association for being such a good partner, such an instrumental partner in the preparation of this webinar. We also hope to have other editions of these webinars. As I said, the topic is so large, so we need to further exchange on this, and gathering, as Ms. Fetala said just a while ago, both the north and the south, east and west of the Mediterranean. This our role is about fostering cooperation, and all the guidance provided today, all the exchanges are very much in line with our work. In the coming weeks, we hope to have an online meeting of our usual working group meetings on transport. We have meetings on maritime transport, on land transport, also on logistics and on aviation. So we hope to resume these meetings, and all the elements that have been discussed today, rest assured that will be used and also shared afterwards with you in these meetings. So thanks again. I don't know if Philippe wants to add something, but
no, nothing to add. It was just perfect what you said. Just thank you for all, and see you physical or not online. See you next and in coming weeks. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, so thanks to everybody, and have a good day or a good evening, depending on where you have connected to the webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.